Hey all, it's Paul from Drums and Rums with the Backbeats Meets the Spirits here. We are episode number 110, and we're going from the East Coast to the West Coast. And I first learned about our guest from the Just Drinking show. It's a rum review channel on YouTube, hosted by Roger and Robert. And then I finally got a chance to actually meet this person in person at the Rum Renaissance Festival last year, the Miami Rum Renaissance Festival, which is we scheduled for this year, November 12th and 13th. So we'll talk a little bit about that. But let me introduce our guest to the podcast, the owner, distiller of Just Rum, based in Sandy, Oregon, John Hasbrouck. How you doing, John?
I'm doing well, Paul. Thanks for putting this together, man. I appreciate.
Yeah. I'm glad we finally got a chance. I know we've like I said, we've met before, um, last year, and again, that's the cool thing about all these different rum social media shows or content or podcasts or YouTube channels that we all get a chance to learn. You know, somebody finds somebody to kind of do a show on or a review, and then that's how more people learn about it. And it's definitely, I think, a great way for some of the craft spirits companies in general use as an equalizer to some of the large marketing behind some of the bigger names and so forth, because the internet's all connected and things like this, right? So yeah. So very cool. So this all starts here in so you're up in Oregon, and I'm sure folks you probably get questioned this all the time is rum in Oregon.
Yeah. Well, when I started this, I was living in Washington State. And if you think it's hard to make rum in Washington or in Oregon, it's impossible in Washington if that's all you want to do. Um, the craft distillery trade, God bless them, uh, there are a lot of different craft distillers all over the US, and each state has different rules for how you can actually start the process to distill. In Washington, where I was living at the time, you have to use 51% Washington agricultural products to make any spirit if you want to be a craft distiller and get licensed in Washington. And they've got a few, a lot of them are making whiskey and what have you, but sugarcane does not grow in Washington, so you won't find a rum distillery or a distillery that's more rum focused anywhere in the state of Washington. And that kind of forced me to look at Oregon and opening my distillery over here. I was born and raised in Oregon. I was living in Washington at the time, though. Um, so, yeah, it's been a fun ride. We've been making rum in Oregon for 3 years, triple digit growth every year, which is awesome. You've had my rum, it's amazing. Uh, it's definitely different. I've been beat up along the way by rum aficionados and the rum snobbery crowd, and I've been forced to change my label and got involved in a single trademark dispute. Hell, it's been
Oh,
fun,
gee. Yeah.
but I make
What's
good rum.
That's right. Yeah. I made tonight just a mojito with a little. I have not seen a mojito with a little splash with grenadine. So I did tape a little video of me making it before we started here tonight. And
That's
yeah,
awesome.
it's definitely yeah, it's a different. And let's talk about that, because I think that's really what's unique is what what I want to understand more about is right, the wood and the barrels. Because again, here, let me just kind of play here for the showing the camera here, and I'll talk about it, and we'll get into a little bit more. Obviously, this is your first product there, the simple white, right?
Correct.
It all
Yeah.
starts there, and then we have a blackberry rum.
Ah, the tax evasion rum. I'll get into that.
Hey, I had today's podcast that dropped. We're taping this, and today is August 2nd, and episode 108 dropped. And I had somebody listening from DC, so hopefully it isn't like the CIA or something like that. But yeah, tax evasion. Thanks. Now I'm gonna get tax my audit right. And then also here is the Oregon oak rested.
Absolutely. It's a good one.
Yep. And then now I'm sure most people are like, man, how does a guy in Florida, which is probably like on the other side of the earth, right, end up with four, these bottles here, and then finally the maple rested.
Now
So
that's my jam right there. That's my baby.
So, I know we can dive into this pool here in the shallow end head first, or we can go in, into the deep end. But before we get talking about the rums here, it all started right. It all started, as you said, you're talking about there about starting it in Oregon rather than Washington State, and but there's a re- why were you even starting rum?
Okay, so this is really bizarre. I was surprised by a rum and a series of inheritance and happy accidents come into play. It's a long story, so I'll shorten it up as much as I can. I grew up in Eastern Oregon and I grew up drinking whatever was on sale. You know, so uh, I thought that like Pendleton was top shelf whiskey, Crown Royal was top shelf whiskey. That to me was the creme de la creme. Uh, you know, Coors Original Brown Label was my favorite beer. And I was fortunate enough to take a job in Australia where I learned what alcohol taxation does to prices. And when I was over there in Sydney, you could get a fifth of Jack Daniels for $64, or you could get a 12-year-old Albalor Scotch for 72. And I mean, when you're talking that little bit of a difference, I started drinking higher end spirits just because I couldn't stomach the thought of $60 for Jack Daniels. It just didn't sit well.
Right.
So after a year and a half there, when I came back home, my palate had changed. And so I found that the stuff that I used to like, I didn't like it so much anymore. So I found myself still buying the premium whiskeys that I was used to buying in Australia. Didn't really do rum much. Rum was a mixer.
Mhm.
I liked a good mojito. Who doesn't, right?
Right.
In the
Yep.
hot summertime.
Yep.
uh, or rum and apple juice, but I never said, pour me a glass of rum neat and let me just sip that. That just never came out of my mouth. Um, while I was living in Australia, I inherited a pot still from my great uncle, and I never wanted it. I knew he made liquor. I'd been over to his house. He made stuff that was just terrible, like
I love it.
rock,
I
if you
never
will.
wanted it, but guess what? You got it.
Well, yeah, I was named after him. He was my mom's favorite uncle, and him and I we always got along great because I was his namesake or whatever, however that works out. And so he left it to me. I'm like, great. I put it in my garage. It sat there. Then I did a bucket list trip to the Galapagos Islands, and on the way back, kind of as a joke, I saw a bottle of rum in the duty free shop. I don't even remember the brand, and that's unfortunate because I wish I had it. I wish I could tell. But it was 12 years old, barrel aged in the mountains of Ecuador, and I was like, well, that's an interesting tale. Thinking, rum's a mixer, it's inexpensive. I'll buy it and bring it home as a joke. So that's what happened. And it sat in my liquor cabinet from September to February. My day job is basically a type of computer programmer. I do a lot of databases. And like a lot of other programmers, sometimes we get fixated on a problem and you dive right in and you lose track of the rest of the world. You can write code for, a day and a half. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, what do you mean it's tomorrow?
You get lost.
Happened
You
to
get
me.
lost. Yeah, you get lost in it.
Yeah,
Right.
I hear artists are the same way. Like I know musicians that'll be like playing a jam session or, writing music and they get caught up in the music and a day goes by and they're like, what the hell just happened? Same thing,
Yep.
right? And so I had some friends over because in the Pacific Northwest, we have a thing called Indian summer where it warms up and barbecues happen in January or February. Most of the month is cold and wet and rainy, but sometimes you'll get a nice 64-degree weekend and sun's out. And so you and your friends get together and play like it's springtime. And that's what happened. I had some friends over. They drank all of my whiskey. Living in Washington, it's not a control state. you can go buy more at a grocery store. And I had intended to do so, but I didn't on Monday or Tuesday. Roll around Wednesday morning, I'm writing code for a problem, and it took all night and into Thursday. And I'm like, oh my God, I'm done. Great. 30 hours. I texted my boss. I'm like, I'm done for the day. I know it's like 10 o'clock in the morning. I'm done. I'm going to get a drink and go to bed. Have a nice day. See you tomorrow. And I go downstairs thinking I'm going to pour some whiskey, open the liquor cabinet, and find that, oh, yeah, I meant to go to the store. Um, so I'm like, what am I going to have to mix that rum with? And a funny thing happened. When I opened it up, it was amazing. It was on par with many of the more expensive whiskeys I had. Like my typical go-to was the Macallan 12-year Sherry Oak Rested,
Okay.
which is why I love this maple expression that I make. It reminds me of those same flavors in a rum, but uh, yeah, it was just it
It's
was amazing. Which all of us go ahead.
yeah, no, it's interesting how, and talk to everybody about how it's fascinating listening to you talk about the inspiration, right? You were a whiskey guy and then started making rum, right? But there
Yeah,
was based off of something that you used to, and it's funny, right? You run across a lot of that where people try your rum or try rums in general that's been aged. They almost swear it is whiskey or bourbon, right?
yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
And what's funny is I myself was so surprised by it that instead of going to bed, I started drinking that bottle of rum and doing history research. I'm like looking up the history of rum. Why is this rum so different? Is barrel aging a thing? How long has have people actually been making great rum? Because I always, to me, it was Bacardi, Captain Morgan,
Right.
Sailor Jerry's, Kraken, and there were some sweet ones that I'd had. There was a brand out of Fiji, Seven Tiki. They made a vanilla rum that man, it made a great cocktail. But it's not something I would be like, let me pour up a dozen of those and serve them up like I would serve whiskey. It was, cocktail time. And it was funny because I came across like so many different things in drinking that bottle of rum and doing my history research that I was like, wow, I didn't know that rum could be made from molasses or from cane juice. And as a matter of fact, I didn't know that the art of actually distilling, was brought to the New World by the enslaved peoples that were brought over. They were doing it with cane in Africa before they ever came over here. And the first stills that they were using in the New World were actually ceramic. Blew my mind. And then that led to, because they were using it for medicinal purposes, and that led to the plantation owners, if you will, uh, taking some of it, because it before that, the alcohol that was in the New World was wine that was shipped in from Europe. And the sugar plantations, uh, sugar was very profitable. You had three countries that were profiting largely off of that, which was France, Spain, and England. And over time, France lost a couple of major wars with Spain and England, couldn't compete in the shipping industry, so they lost out on the sugar wars. Whereas France and England, I mean, excuse me, Spain and England still continued to produce sugar more so than rum, and their rum was actually made from a byproduct of the sugar production, which was molasses. And France started doing their cane juice rum and exporting that back to Europe. And the predominance of the rum trade was really owned by Britain and Spain, molasses based rums, which are the majority of the rums that you find in the States. Whereas what's now called rum agricole, cane juice rum, France was doing that and producing it, sending it home. In Brazil, it was cachaça, which they still produce.
Right.
So for me, everything was about the history of rum. And somewhere in drinking and doing research and coming across a book by Jean Baptiste, who was a French monk traveling around the Caribbean. He wrote a memoir in 1684 of his travels in and around the islands, the different colonial islands of France and Spain and England. And he described rum agricole as rum made from cane juice or agricultural rum, and rum industrial as rum made from molasses. And remember that he wrote this in 1684, and his travels were in the Caribbean up through 1680. And the weird part about that is, to be rum agricole today, you can't use the equipment that they were using in the 1680s because it didn't exist. Somewhere in 1996, the French government protected rum agricole. And as part of that AOC, the piece of paper defining what makes it up, you have to use the column still. And the column still wasn't invented for another 200 years. So I bring that up because I'm still a little salty about how they busted my chops over my initial label, but I've gotten over my saltiness. Um, so in all this research, I'm sitting here thinking to myself as I'm drinking that bottle of Ecuadorian rum, I have a pot still. What did rum taste like then? Was it as good as what I'm drinking now? Because the Ecuadorian rum was made from molasses. It was not a cane juice rum. I know that from remembering the taste and what the other stuff that I've grown my palate to now. So it was kind of like, I have a pot still. Huh. So I started looking up ingredients and I'm like, well, molasses is out. Because in my research, I found out that molasses is not processed today the same way that it was in the 1600s. And I wasn't interested in making Bacardi. I can buy that.
Right.
I wasn't interested in making a modern rum. I wanted to see, the original rum. What were they tasting back then? So that meant pot still, and the only way I could go was cane juice, because nowadays they use centrifuges and other equipment to actually extract molasses versus just boiling the cane and skimming it off with a stick. Back then, the major focus was sugar production, because sugar could be sold for far more money than rum. Rum was just, an alcohol made from a waste product,
Right.
or alcohol that was made from the sugar juice, the cane juice, because you couldn't take sugar to market because you couldn't compete. And that was the French's problem. But
So this
so anyway,
so
yeah.
yeah, so this all this this is what happens when you finish your work, kids, and you get to go home and play, and then you drink some rum, you go on the internet, and then you have these great ideas that, wait a minute, I can do this.
Oh yeah. It was crazy. Do you have any idea what it cost to ship 32 gallons of cane juice overnight from Louisiana to Oregon via FedEx?
32 gallons. Okay, so let me think here.
That's 4 8-gallon buckets of frozen cane.
I'm gonna think it. So let's see if we play the high-low game here. So, is it higher than $1,000?
No, but it's close.
Ooh.
And then I found a lab that does microbes. They specialize in microbes, and I sent them a spec saying that I need a yeast that dates back at least 300 years. I wanted a yeast somewhere that they could date between 300 and 400 years, and I found a lab that would do it for me. They emailed me 5 pages of serial numbers of yeast strains that they had that were recovered through various means. And I don't know how they recovered this. I don't know if it was clay or honey or if it was tree sap. There's so many different ways that labs have been able to recover yeast strains and other microbes, but I'm not interested in other microbes. So the yeast strain that I've got was isolated to the southern edge of Barbados. It's a little over 300 years old, give or take. And I have a lab grow it for me at the rate that I consume it.
Wow.
And what was funny is when I first contacted them, I said, I need 200 grams of yeast. And they said, we sell it by the kilogram. I was like, huh, okay. How much is a kilogram? Like 130 bucks. Like, oh my God, send it. So, it was really, I had no idea. I mean, I'm like, I'm going to taste this. And I might have just spent $1,000 on stuff that's going to be terrible. Don't care. So that was the start. I
Yeah.
mixed up the cane juice, the yeast. I let it bubble in my house. A little further research probably would have told me that that's a lot of CO2 and maybe you should leave it ventilated. Um,
So,
oh
so not
Lord.
hopefully you don't answer this question. Blink twice if it's yes, and blink once if it's no. So theoretically, you were making moonshine.
I wouldn't say that because to me, moonshine is something that you do in the dark in the hills. And I was in a townhouse in Vancouver, so no. Um,
Well, look, John. I think I told you that my wife is grew up in New Mexico, so she has always referred to where I lived in New Jersey was the foothills, the Appalachians of the foothills. You definitely were a lot more where you're living was a lot more mountain-esque than where
yeah.
moonshine.
You know, I was definitely not doing this on the
Yeah, yeah,
permitted side of things.
yeah, yeah.
I didn't have a permit. But you know what? Washington is cool because in the state of Washington, um, they don't object as long as you make stuff at home and you don't try to sell it. You're not marketing it. So I was living in Vancouver. I wasn't selling it. The TTB might argue that they were losing tax money, so I won't go into that.
Mm-hmm.
But for me, it was an experiment. It was no different than, hey, I want to try this and see what it comes out like. I wasn't planning on opening a distillery. There are plenty of cheaper ways to make hooch than there is let's order some stuff off of FedEx and find a lab. Because I mean, you could go down to the brewery store and pick up, turbo yeast. And as a matter of fact, my cousin who built the still for my great uncle, I called him up to have him come show me how to run it because I didn't know. I'd never run a still before. It had a control box. I don't know what any of these knobs do. So, you know, yeah, I was like, can you come up and show me how to run this thing? He's like, yeah, sure, no worries. So he gets up there and he's like, so what are we running through the still? And I told him, and he got all kinds of belligerent, calling me all kinds of idiocy. He's like, you can make liquor out of table sugar and, bread yeast, right? Why did you spend blah, blah, blah? And that was 2 hours of just him giving me a hard time. But an interesting thing happened when the still got up to temperature, and because you get rid of the four shots first, but then you get what they call on the step, where you're actually pulling ethanol out. We're sitting there with big old tablespoons, sipping it off like a bunch of rednecks just to see what it tastes like. And it was amazing. It was unreal. Coming out of the still, first pass, 145 proof ethanol. You'd put it on your tongue and it would evaporate and you could taste the sugar cane in the rum. It was awesome. I was like, that doesn't taste like any rum I've ever had.
Right.
All of a sudden, I'm realizing that cane juice rum and molasses rum, two different animals. I mean, I knew it, but you don't know it until you try it,
Well, yeah,
right?
I think you hit a good point there, and obviously for those that are listening are the rummers, they probably know a lot of this and so forth, but those who aren't, definitely this is great information. Is that there's a whole big world about rum, and there's actually so much debate over, as John mentioned, rum made here by by the French or by the Spaniards, and there's all the different nuances, and that yeah, there is such a difference. And most people, John, is here at least maybe I would think in the U.S. that are not rum enthusiasts are mostly accustomed to molasses. You know,
I agree. Yeah, absolutely. And they're also not just molasses, they're also used to things that are run out of reflux stills or column stills. Um, Either if it's a pot still, it's a pot still that has a high level of reflux, which is the process of the alcohol chilling along the sidewalls of the column as it goes up. And it's not a true column still. We don't have that kind of time to go into the differences. Come visit my tasting room. My tasting room is going to be dedicated to education. Promise.
awesome.
Not just that. As a matter of fact, I pulled down U.S. patent pictures, images, because I found out that patent images are public domain. So I'm literally putting the patents for the different still technology up on the walls. So when people come
Cool.
in and see my stills, they're like, okay, you're using that, and the stuff that people are using, most of the other distilleries was invented in 1780, 1824, 1840, 1880. So I'm using technology that's well before that. um, so yeah, that's kind of one of the things. I want to be as historically correct as I can in what that flavor profile is,
Mhm.
because it's interesting. The rum that came out of that still the first time was so good. My cousin, who was busting my chops, was like, "Okay, I stand corrected." 2 hours I listened to him, and then all of a sudden, one sip, and he's like, "Oh my God, you have no idea what you have created there." And he was right. I didn't. I had no idea. I knew that what I was sipping was really good. And I was unaware at the time that technically you're supposed to do a stripping run where you harvest all of the alcohol out of the wash, and then a spirits run where you clean it up. I didn't know that was a thing. So we did a single pass, and we're sampling it every, I'd say 10 proof, but that's probably being a little too liberal. It's probably closer to every 5 proof we're sampling it. Um, and it was really good all the way through the 120s, through the 100s, down into the 90s. And when it was about 80 proof coming out of the still, it immediately went metallic. It went from something that was sweet, that was delightful to have on your tongue, to something that was like chewing on tinfoil, was just absolutely unpleasant. And so we shut the run off, and those jars we didn't keep because we were collecting in these little tiny pint jars and combining them in a 2 gallon jug. And I ended up with a gallon and a quarter out of a 7 gallon still of what I considered to be drinkable rum. And it had an average proof of 122 proof, so 61% single pass. And that's what I kept. And I started making mojitos for friends. And hey, try this rum. I made it like they did in the old days. And it was awesome. And then I ordered a couple of little tiny like 2 liter barrels off of Amazon that were charred oak, and started aging the rum in charred oak. And after about a month, it started to taste like a whiskey, and that kind of threw me off a little bit. And then I was like, I don't want a rum that tastes like whiskey. And so I read that Woodford Reserve was finishing their some of their bourbon in maple casks. And I was like, oh, that's probably good. So I ran down to a lumber store called Crosscut Lumber and bought some sugar maple, just sticks of sugar maple, cut them to length and toasted them up in my oven inside my townhouse, which smoked it out. Don't do that; it was bad. And I was using some large 1 quart mason jars, and I would put these maple staves in there and soak the rum on the maple. And it was funny because day one it tasted better, day two it tasted better, day three was even better, day four it was terrible, and it got worse for the next week. And then it started to slowly come back. And I'm like, okay, because I kept sampling it. At one point, I was only sampling it about every 3 days because it was not improving. But then it started to come back. And after 2 months, it was awesome. I was like, okay, this is pretty good. And so that's where the Maplewood Rested came from, was that I liked the flavor, and that I don't think anybody else is doing a maple liquor the way we are. Um, I've heard of people using uh, maple barrels, which are really an oak barrel that used to hold maple syrup,
Mm.
because that's what Woodford was doing. They got some second use barrels out of Canada. Those barrels had been used for maple syrup, and they weren't barrels made actually out of maple wood.
Mm.
There's a reason for that. Maple wood is very porous. It has a vein structure in it, which is where they get the maple syrup when they tap the trees. And so maple wood has a tendency to leak. Didn't even think that through. I had no idea. When I liked what I had coming out with the maple wood expression, I went to different cooperages trying to get them to make me small maple barrels that I could age my rum in just for personal use, right?
Right.
Nobody would do it. They're like, nope, we don't use maple. We use oak. We will
Huh.
do cherry, but no, we're not going to use maple. And I finally found a cooperage in New Hampshire that was like, yeah, we'll do it. The barrels are probably going to leak, but we'll see what we can do to make it work and no guarantees. I'm like, let's do it. Um, so, yeah, I'll show you some of the maple barrels. You can literally see they leak, which is why nobody else is doing it. But the product that comes out, that's actually what I'm drinking tonight, is rum that's been aged in a barrel, an actual full maple barrel, not just staves, for 2 years. That bottle you have is stave aged for 4 months, and I like it. It's really good. But for as good as that is, Paul, this will blow you away. I'll
Okay.
bring you some for Miami,
Okay.
and you'll see exactly what I mean.
So this here that I'm looking at, and that as you're talking about the maple wood rested is 51 ABV. So it's got some proof to it. So
It does.
yeah. So yeah, I think that's interesting, and I think we were exchanging some emails back and forth about barrels and buying a barrel, and I had an idea about doing something with it. More on the other side of this whole show. And I talked to a guy who makes drums and hand drums and makes it stave. I always thought until I went up to his place in Georgia was the wood was all the wood's replies, and it gets molded into the many sheets of the wood for like drums. But then I found out, I guess this maybe the show goes to show you how much of a poor drummer I am, is he makes them with with staves and then forms it and shapes it and so forth. And I was like, that's pretty cool. And then I started thinking, dude, with your woodman, craftsmanship and so forth, I'm sure because I'm hearing a lot of people saying that there's some barrel shortage issues or trying to get your hands on stuff and whatnot. Like, I'm wondering, you could almost transition into this weird podcast that took drummers and rummers have now created possibly an interesting marriage of, opportunities, right? So I don't know. We'll see. But yeah,
Yeah.
I do, John, as I would be interested in, I said, if you've got a barrel, I'd love to, maybe get that from you and pass it over to, Michael Outlaw, who we had on one of our guests. And, again, we call this all part of the alums. We connect interesting people that probably would have never crossed paths in life. And now here, possibly, maybe I've got a guy who's making me a drum out of rum barrels. Isn't that fucking,
That's
wouldn't that be
awesome.
fucking cool, right?
That's awesome.
just rum. Yeah, wait, we need to work on just drums too, right? Yeah.
There you go. Yeah, that's pretty awesome.
So yeah,
Yeah.
so it sounds like really, it seems like you became, it was like we said, that light switch happened, and you just really went down that rabbit hole and to consume everything you can do, and then also too that it's you didn't, you kind of did this in a experimental kind of DIY. I don't mean it in a bad way, but DIY. But I mean, you kind of like you don't know what you don't know, and sometimes when you do that, those things like that, you do things that people never thought of that ultimately turns out to be great. And obviously, that's what I'm picking up on, in what you're talking about, how you got to this point.
Yeah, it's one of those things that I never set out to open a distillery. I just wanted to see what it tasted like, and I had the equipment,
Right.
and that just kind of led to because I happened to have picked the right yeast. I mean, literally, you get 5 pages of yeast. It was just put a finger down. I'll take that one. Um, you know, I have since tried other yeasts off of that list, and I could have easily picked a yeast that made a terrible product, and I would have never done anything else with it. It would have just been, that's disgusting. Okay, rum back then sucked. Um,
Wow. So
you
that could
know,
have. So you're thinking that could have really, and this whole thing could have ended really quick.
absolutely.
Mm.
It's been I tell my friends it has been a series of very happy accidents. Um, you know, I could have gone to the liquor store and topped up whiskey and I would have still been sitting on a bottle of rum from Ecuador that I had zero plans of opening. And that's 4 years ago now. You know, so many little things that, just came into being. And if I didn't have the pot still sitting in the garage, if I wasn't getting tipsy drinking a bottle of rum by myself, if I didn't find the right yeast, so many little
Yeah.
things. One of the biggest
Drinking
ones,
always makes creativity, right? I got a great
it
idea.
does, it does. And to be fair, I would have never actually opened a legitimate distillery if I didn't get scared. I mean, I was doing this and giving it away to friends because it was good. You know, my day job is, 40 hours a week as a programmer, and I'm compensated well for that. Well, a type of programmer. But that uh, would have never said, "Hey, let me go into business and take on the risks and, you know, and have employees and see what I could do with it." That was never a thought process. I'm sitting there making rum as a hobby, one man show, 7 gallon still, takes 8 hours to run, fermenting in a townhouse and working my day job. And that's just a hobby, one of many.
Right.
And I had shared some of my rum with some friends, and one day, this rando dude rocks up to my house, knocks on the door, and says, "I'd like to buy some rum, please." I went into full on panic mode. I thought, oh my God, this
Oh,
dude's
they
like
found you
mid
out.
30s.
The feds are
Yeah, oh,
after you.
yeah, dude. Shortcut hair, stocky build, mid 30s. I'm like, oh God, I'm going to jail. Now, to be fair, that probably wouldn't have happened even if he was. I mean, they probably, it probably would have just been a slap on the wrist. Wasn't like I was selling anything, but I was full on panic mode. I'm seeing strange cars in the neighborhood. I'm like, oh my God. I'm trying to
This
figure out how I get rid of my
this
rum. Do I
this
sink it? Do I keep it? You know?
this sounds like like an FX show or series, about
Oh, it,
under the radar, all those crazy spy shows they have about under the
yeah,
radar in
yeah.
places like are not New York and LA or whatever, it's Oregon.
Yeah. So it's funny because the guy that stopped by, he only lived like 3 blocks from me. And he was at, because I shoot pool. I like to shoot amateur pool league. I'm not good, but it's fun. It occupies spot, some time and space. And so my pool captain was a mutual friend of ours, and my pool captain had some of my rum at his house. They were doing mojitos and barbecue, and the guy's like, "Wow, that's really good. I'd love to have some." And he's like, "Yeah, my buddy makes it. He lives up by you." And so they ended up
The word
swapping my information.
the word got out.
Yeah, except my pool captain didn't call me and say, "Hey, I'm sending a guy, he's a neighbor of yours, likes your rum, would like to stop by." So again, series of happy accidents. Because had I got that phone call, I would have expected him, and we'd still be making rum as a hobby, no harm, no foul. But instead, I was like, "Oh my God." And then when I realized that we shared a mutual friend, I was like, "Okay, so people like my stuff enough to search it out. Well, now that's interesting. Maybe I should consider becoming a distillery." And so I started researching opening one in Washington State. And if I wanted to make whiskey and vodka and gin and use some Washington corn and rye and wheat and what have you, well, it wouldn't be an issue. But I didn't. I only wanted to make rum because I think there are a lot of producers making whiskeys and gins and vodkas, and I'm not going to enter a crowded market space. I'm going to make rum, just rum, hence the name. And I say that because so many people say, "So do you make whiskey too?" I'm like, no,
Just
no, no, I
rum.
do not. Just rum. Like the name says, I make just rum. That's it. So yeah, that was the start. So Oregon said, yeah, no problem. So I moved over to Oregon and bought a small farm and uh, applied to the TTB and got everything legal and licensed up and started selling my rum in Oregon, which
So
was cool.
John, did in Oregon or in your county was distilling a a ongoing thing around, the area or the state? Because there's a lot of other, folks that I talked to. They were like kind of new to their area, or how do the regulators or county or the cities, I, what do we do with a distiller? We've never had a distillery. How do we license it and all those things? I mean, was there
Um,
some of those challenges that you went through?
no, not really, because Portland's got several distilleries, and I'm in Clackamas County, and there were already a couple of distilleries here. So people had already paved the way, and Oregon's a control state, so they want their money. If you want to open a distillery and you're willing to pay them, they're happy to have you. Um, you know, I applied for the federal TTB permit at the same time that I applied for Oregon. And Oregon was like, they approved me 2 days after the feds did. It's like
Oh,
boom and boom. I'm like, oh, so yeah, um, it was pretty easy for that part.
right.
Um,
So,
yeah.
so
Now,
the,
the
the
farm that
yeah.
I bought, interestingly enough, the farm I bought is zoned RRFF5, which is rural residential forestry farming 5 acre lots, right? But it falls under a residential uh, zoning, which was kind of funny. So I was paying, because I live at the property too, I was paying residential property taxes. Now, the blackberry rum, I did not do that my first year. Obviously, I was distilling for a year, owed some taxes, had an accountant, guy that does my taxes. He comes out and brings the documents out to me, and he's like, wow, your distillery is overrun with blackberries. I'm like, I know. He said, if you make a blackberry rum, using blackberries from your property, you have to use at least $600 worth of blackberries from your property. You would be a farm and you'd save $2,700 a year in property taxes. Huh. Say it isn't so. So that was the beginning of the blackberry rum, because I was like, what if it's terrible and nobody likes it? He goes, they don't have to. You have to make it and legitimately offer it for sale. I was like, done. Um,
You got a
that's
good,
the only rum that I,
yeah, you got a good
what's
accountant
that?
there. You got a good accountant there.
I do. He's really good. But so that was kind of the thing, the blackberry rum is the only rum I make that's not historically accurate, in that blackberries don't grow in the Caribbean. So I don't think anybody making rum in the 1700s had a blackberry rum. I do believe they did infusions with other fruits. I know they did stuff with spices and citrus. So but $2,700 is $2,700.
That is right. That is for sure, man.
So, it's been good. We now we're moving off of my property and moving into a commercial building. That's been essentially 3 years. When I bought this place, I thought, wow, that barn is huge. I think this will do us for, at least 7 years. Heck, we might be able to stay here 10. No. 3 years later,
Outgrew it.
no. Yep.
So, so that's a real interesting how the progression there, right? And the right things are lined up. The I'm trying to blank. Sorry. Um, the inheritance.
Series of happy accidents.
That's right. Yeah, and you just kind of go. And again, sometimes you go into things without. I don't want to say low ex. I don't want to say low expectations, but again, like I said, you don't know what you don't know, so you're not being oh, you can't do that. Well, no, or rum isn't this or that. And
Oh, we dealt with that already.
mhm,
But at the time, no, you're right.
yeah,
I went into this with curiosity.
right.
I did not know a thing about distilling liquor, let alone making rum. You know, it's been a massive learning curve for 3 years. Um, you know, Originally I was labeling my rum a rum agricole based off of the historical knowledge that I had gained for the process of making rum. I'm making it from cane. I'm not using molasses. by the literature that I read, technically that would be an agricultural rum
Right.
or, a cachaça or something along those lines. So I labeled it rum agricole. And the first year of COVID, some of my bottles ended up getting displayed on a group called the Ministry of Rum. And, they had several thousand members to their site. And they beat me up terribly for using the word agricole because it violated the AOC that was signed in 1996. And uh, there was a part of me that was like, literally, I took a couple of days and I formulated a response, not a reaction. Because my initial reaction was not favorable.
Hey, John, it's okay. You can tell me what you said. It's okay. You can say the F word. This is,
um,
I just got to
I
check
well, I
the,
didn't.
yeah.
I respected the fact that these were thousands of people who loved rum. Also, that many of them are European and part of the European Union. When a government puts up a protectorate, and I get it. I mean, the
Right.
United States does the same thing. To be quote unquote bourbon, you got to be in Kentucky.
Right.
Um, Unfortunately, I'm also a history major, so I'm not a big fan of things that are protected by governments or kings for a region. I did one of my thesis papers on Roquefort cheese and the AOC that was issued by the king that protected Roquefort cheese, also, a blue cheese, because blue is not Roquefort, though, could come from the same caves. Uh, the smaller sheep farmers of that area got hosed by the larger, more influential farmers who had influence in the king's court. And the rules were drafted such that farmers who were living in the same area, making their cheese in the same caves, could not use Roquefort because they didn't meet the guidelines that were picked out by the larger farmers. And as a result, many of them were forced to sell their lands to the larger conglomerates. So
Mm,
I'm not a fan.
right.
Um, that being said, I understand the reasoning and the marketing behind the protectorates and the AOCs.
Right.
However, when you're discussing this with a group of people who are thousands strong, and someday you wish to sell your brand around the world, it is better to acquiesce. And so I invited the Ministry of Rum to help redesign my label. I my goal in selling rum is not to offend, but to educate. And I can't go around passing out copies of a book that was written in French, you know, 400 years ago, um, saying, "Hey, agricole just means made from cane juice." I will acquiesce to your protected certificate that came about in 1996. You can kind of see how I feel about this. Um, and so I literally wrote up a survey, a Google survey, and I submitted it to the members of the Ministry of Rum. I'm like, look, you guys are the rum community. You guys are the people who buy rum, know rum. You have certain expectations. So help me meet those expectations. Tell me what it is you want to see on a label, and I will do my best to make that happen because I'm not trying to alienate people who appreciate rum. To be fair, I never appreciated rum when I appreciated whiskey. I had no idea that there were rums that were comparable to an 18-year-old Macallan, which is a $300 bottle of whiskey. And many of those rums can be had for $100, right?
Right.
So for that, I reached out, I submitted the survey, and surprisingly, I had 380 plus responses to my survey.
Wow.
Okay, so I took what they had to say and I incorporated it into the new label that you have there. So we are a 100% pure cane rum. Um, we're not made from molasses, which is a processed cane product. We use 100% cane. I list the ingredients on the bottle. in big bold letters. The blackberry is just rum and blackberries because that's done with an infusion. I don't use syrups. I literally take 200 gallons of white rum and 300 pounds of Oregon blackberries, and I soak them over the winter. Just let them sit in an IBC food tote, sealed up in a shipping container. The following spring, I filter it out and bottle them. That's the blackberry rum. No other ingredients. My spiced rum is called Just Rum and Spices. We soak the actual spices in the rum. That's how they would have done it back in the 16, 1700s. They didn't have all the processed syrups and flavorings and colorings and all of that. I won't use it. I want to stay kind of true to that historical aspect, um, in spirit at the very least. So yeah.
So that's yeah.
Anyway, as as a result, at the end, I thanked the people of the Ministry of Rum who helped me redesign my label. I showed them when it was 90% ready to go. I showed them when it was done. They got the first peek. I gave them credit in several stories that I wrote up that they were helpful in redesigning the label. And God bless that community. They've been really good to me. Many of the Ministry of Rum have reached out, purchased bottles, have given me feedback on my rum. Um, so it was a good choice. I mean, I could have reacted unfavorably and passed them all of the historical notes and been completely wrong because the consumer is going to vote with their dollars. So let's give them something that meets their expectations.
Right.
You
Yeah.
know,
And
that's where it is.
and it's a big community, right? The Ministry of Rum, and I got an interesting question or ask you is, since it's fairly very recently topical, is, as you mentioned, the designations, the AOCs, is the recent one about Barbados, you know,
Yes.
and identifying the GI, and where, yeah, there's a lot of folks. It's more people probably know, to your point about bourbon and being Kentucky bourbon, and it's only can be made in a certain place, or as you mentioned, well, champagne or scotch or all these other things. But
Yeah.
why is rum? Yeah, rum can be made anywhere, but there's certain nuances about the geographic, placement of it.
Well, and there is, to be fair, um, there's a lot that goes into a rum. There is the type of cane. I visited a distillery in Oahu, um, met the distiller. Tyler was the distiller at the time that I was there. I hope he's still there because he was great. It's Kohana rum. They make rum out of many different varieties of cane, and I don't want to misspeak, but it's either like 52 or 57 or some incredibly large number of varieties of sugar cane that they grow. And one of the things that they do is they list the species of cane on the label of the bottle that you're buying. And you could buy two different bottles of Kohana rum on the same shelf made with different species of rum. And they will have two distinctly, or different, excuse me, different species of sugar cane. They will have two distinctly different flavors. And I enjoyed the time that I spent with Tyler about finding out my cane education, if you will. I've traveled distilleries in Hawaii. Well, traveled to Hawaii, toured distilleries. I've been to Cuba and toured distilleries there, um, as well as different distilleries around the U.S. I want to go hit Brazil and hit some cachaça distilleries, because it's really interesting. You can have two distilleries, same area, who have different types of stills, who use different fermentation lengths or times. And even though everything else is the same, the rum will taste different.
So,
So the
yeah,
protected certificates, is there something to them? Absolutely. My biggest thing is just be honest about what you're doing,
right.
right?
Yep.
If you're going to add caramel coloring, put it on the label. If you're going to do something else, put it on the label. If you're going to use a mix of sugar and molasses, whether it's beet sugar or cane sugar, put it on the label. That's what I take away from the Ministry of Rum. Be honest in your production. You know, I guess that's the big key thing.
Yeah.
And I subscribe to that. Granted, again, I'm ignorant. I'm using a pot still, um, single pass. I'm not using a fancy column still. And when you come and visit me, you'll see just how redneck my pot still is. Because the one I inherited from my great uncle is a converted pony keg with a line arm or lin arm. I don't know how you say it. I say line arm.
Yeah.
That's the part that comes off the still and curves and goes over to the condenser, right? With practically zero reflux. So when I engineered my larger stills, I wanted to keep the same thermodynamics. I purchased my 50-gallon kettle, but I had a fabricator friend make me a line arm for it that matches the thermodynamics of the original because I didn't want to change what I was making.
Right.
And then when I upgraded to a 400-gallon still, same thing. I wanted to keep the same thermodynamic plan of the base still that I always started with. So, I mean, it's just like you go to two different Scotch distilleries, the stills are going to be different. If
Yeah.
you go to different distilleries in Jamaica, the Dominican Republic, not everybody's using the same equipment. And if you could change out one part on the still and change the entire flavor profile.
It,
So,
it's such a, again, every ingredient. We were just talking the trip I just took up to North Carolina. Every bit of equipment, ingredients, everyone has access to these things, right? So it's not so much. I mean, maybe there's some proprietariness, esque, um, but being able to put the right pieces together, right, and figure out the right combination or whatever how each person does it is it's the opportunities out there, um, and I think that's interesting. So in that latitude of so what is the elevation where you're at?
1,000 feet
Okay.
plus or minus.
Okay. So there is I mean, is does the aging process in the barrels, I mean, what kind of impact do you have? And again, for I'm in Florida, so anyone who's down here is obviously we're pretty much at sea level almost. But I mean, is there some of those different
I
nuances?
have a bigger temperature swing
Mm,
than what you do.
okay.
Um, I get a few days a year that are below freezing, not many. Um, Most of the days are moderate, and then I get a couple of days in the summer above 100, but not many. Tropical climates don't really have a huge swing in temperature. I'm sure that that does impact the barrel aging to some degree. Um,
Yeah, because
you
it's
know, I
contracting, right? There's a lot more
yeah,
contracting that's happening than for you, right? Yeah.
yeah. So, but it's hard to tell. I mean, I suppose I could barrel up some and, send it to the tropics and let it sit for 2 years and then try it out.
Hey,
Um,
John, I've
I'm
got
not
no,
at the point where that can happen.
hey man, I got no problem storing a couple barrels here at my house.
Well, that's
I'm South
nice.
Florida. I'm South Florida.
South Florida. Yeah. I just bring you a couple, see what happens.
Yeah, there you
You know,
go.
no, this has been a great journey. I love it. You know, and I find that there are far more people who want to be helpful than there are people who want to be harmful.
Yeah,
Um,
this is a real good community. I mean, yeah, you do have, as you said, there's some folks that do take it very. It's okay to take it very serious and passionate about it, like you said about the Ministry of Rum, and then them being very feedback to provide, and also to you, man. That is something there, like you said, you know, you were very open and very open minded about it's not the hey, this is highway or my way or the highway, you know.
yeah, and well, and they quoted. They said you can't be a rum agricole because you're not, made in a French protectorate. And I'm like, what? I didn't even have an idea that that was a thing because I didn't do any research on modern rums. I wasn't interested in modern rums.
Right.
I was interested in what was being made in the 1600s. If it was something that was put out by a company that was done in the 1880s, I had zero interest. A lot of people don't realize that the United States of America was the largest producer of rum uh, post our the Declaration of Independence, forming of our nation. We made more rum than any other country in the world. We were buying up tons of molasses and rum is what we made. Even the colonies were taking the molasses and making rum because that was the spirit of choice. Whiskey wasn't a thing in the US until you had Scottish and Irish immigrants after the potato famine. Um, you know, uh, you talk about Shays Rebellion, Whiskey Rebellion, as they call it. That was all after the fact. Good buddy of mine, also a history buff, he likes to make a paraphrase about that. He says, "When in the course of human events you tax my liquor, I'm going to fight." That sums up the Whiskey Rebellion. Um, Prior to that, though, rum was the number one spirit in the U.S.
Right.
It fell out of favor um, over tariffs on molasses. That was the biggest thing. It became cheaper to make whiskey than it was to make rum. All things considered equal, rum is the easiest spirit to make. And I take it one step further because I don't double distill it. I didn't even know a stripping run was a thing until probably 6 months after I was legal, open, and operating, and I started touring other distilleries to see what they were about. And I went to one here in Portland, and he was talking about a stripping run. I'm like, stripping run? What's that? Um,
Like, oh, what? Stripping.
yeah. So, yeah, I have my own belief about that. I think distillers do a stripping run because they all, no, that's a lie. Don't let me group everybody in together. I think distillers do a stripping run because somewhere along the line, that became the school of thought to get more alcohol out of your run. Um, and a lot of times it boils down to when you're reading the patents on distillation technology changing, all of it was about being more energy efficient or more alcohol efficient. You could either run the still cheaper or you could get more alcohol out, which equated to more profitability. Neither of those has been my goal. When I first started doing this, I was simply trying to see what it tasted like in the beginning, and I liked it. So that's what I wanted to continue to make. I throw away more alcohol than uh, probably most other distillers because I'm not interested in dipping in so deep to gather those flavors, if you will,
Hmm.
that are I find to be undesirable. You know, um,
Yeah.
well, I mean, if you think about it, how do you make vodka if you're doing it in a pot still? In a column still, it's easy. You just take the stuff that comes out of the top plates and you just boil everything until it comes out at the top plates. That's really an oversimplification. That's
Yeah.
not true.
And I didn't,
But
and
it's
again,
close.
yeah, and I didn't know that it was that. I know there's some companies that make both, uh, or as you mentioned, right, multiple spirits, and how the slight turn where you're making rum or vodka is I guess a temperature thing. Yeah. So it's yeah,
Well, it is
yeah.
because it all boils down to if you distill all of the conagers out, the things that give the spirit, its essence, its flavor. If you boil all of those out, you have vodka. You have a neutral spirit. You have pulled off ethanol. Every time you redistill in a pot still, you get less and less flavor in the spirit and you get closer and closer to ethanol. When the pot still technology was all that existed to get vodka, you just kept redistilling it. The original vodkas were made out of potato mash. And if you ever tasted the first, second, or third distillation of a potato mash, you can see why they continued to redistill it until it became neutral,
Meanwhile, there's a potato famine, right?
right? You know, Um, so yeah, I want to capture as much flavor out of that first pass as I can.
Right.
And so that's what I do.
Yeah, cool. So the distillery there, and I know we're gonna have some, visuals of it here. So you've got going on there you're doing tours, tastings, classes, pairings. You just kind of have it. So how big is the space that, and I know you mentioned open to other ideas. Do you do music there too, or
I will probably do a little bit. Yeah, I'll probably do a
Okay.
little bit in this building.
Okay.
I think if we stay on the same trajectory we're on, I will buy a large plot of dirt in 3 years and start building a facility that in 5 years will be my permanent home, or at least permanent as I see the vision now. Um, that could change.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, good Lord, you know, it's been fun and exciting so far.
Yeah. No, it's great. It's interesting. I'm glad we got a chance tonight. And I know we've known, or know of each other and so forth. But yeah, definitely the history and how Just Rum had came about, and and again, your passion for history. And let me see. So yes, I did go off camera. So as you mentioned that you are a history buff, so there is a book, and you may know probably a good bit of it. So
I have that book.
you do, okay.
I absolutely have that book.
Oh,
Yep.
okay. So Matt was a guest on the podcast.
Oh,
So
sweet.
yeah, so that's I can't remember how I stumbled across him. I think he posted like in one of the Facebook groups, the international groups, and I saw it. I'm like, well, that sounds like a really interesting story. So anyway, so yeah, so check out Rum. They distill a history of colonial Australia. Of course, there's always.
Yeah.
I know we say all the time, right? Rum is fun. Well, rum is also gets you into a lot of trouble. Yeah, when you read this book, you definitely.
Yeah, I mentioned I lived in Australia, right? I've been to the Bundaberg distillery and believe it or not, a couple of other places in Queensland where you can get rum far better than Bundaberg.
Hmm, it's again, most people would not, would even consider places that there's rum in certain parts. Again, I think there's such a closed minded, again, because they've been focused or marketing, advertising that it's only the Caribbean or only certain places or,
No, but the
right?
first rums were done well outside of that. Again, I mentioned that the slave trade is what brought distilling of cane over to the New World. Before that, cane was done for sugar production. It wasn't done to make a beverage. And there's a great audio book that I downloaded from a professor that talks about the history of rum and the empire building that the rum trade brought about in uh, uh, the New World.
Mm,
And really, rum built the empires. That was the whole deal behind it. Here, I'm just gonna look in my audiobooks
yep.
here. Um, but I'll give you the name of the book, and I strongly recommend it. Um, let's see.
Well, I think like even you,
Oh, here it is. Whoops. Title here. It's The History of Rum, and the author is, let's see if I can make this bigger. Okay, I'm gonna pull out my old people eyes because don't show anybody this picture. John Donahue. He's a professor who teaches history of the Atlantic empires. And he wrote a great book, The History of Rum. And it opens up talking about how the discovery of sugarcane was actually in what's now India, um, literally 3,000 years BC. Um, so, what is now rum has been being distilled in Africa long before it was ever being distilled in the New World.
right.
Um, you know, so what was it? The king, the I forget the quote, but the king who had sent his army into this portion of India found, quote unquote, a reed that produces honey without bees. And that was the first cane that was actually then started to be cultivated.
Hmm.
Um, so,
That's
yeah,
yeah. Oh,
lots of history.
oh, I know. I think John, that's sometimes when I talk to have different guests on. There's a history aspect or what's there behind their brand or when I get a chance to even travel to places that have a history is that ties to their brand and their product or how it's made, etc. Yeah, I think that I realize that I am somewhat of a closet history, whatever you want to call it. But I'm like, because it's fascinating to understand some of these things and what makes people tick or how it came about, which is awesome. Which is awesome. So definitely for sure.
Yeah.
So
You know,
yeah, go ahead, go ahead.
oh, I was going to say one of the things that I've found with the craft distilling industry is the people who start the majority of the craft distilleries. do so because they're either curious or they find something that they like. And a lot of them are people who just like to experiment and play. Then you have the other crowd who open up craft distilleries who are hoping to cash in by making a craft distillery that gets bought out by somebody
Yeah.
else. And you know what? Financially speaking, that's not a bad plan.
Yeah.
Um, I'll tell you, I'm not that guy. I have stuff that's aging right now that I won't release for 10 years. I decided that when I was going to do this, it was going to be a long term thing. I want to see what my rum tastes like when it's 25 years old.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
and
you got
one of the commitments, we do not buy rum. We make it all. So if you buy just rum, you got something we made. I'm not going to purchase any rum. If I have to do that, I'm in the wrong business. Time for me to get out.
it's yeah, I know a lot. I asked somebody that question. I won't say who. Recently asked them, said, are you, would you ever be in the place of if somebody came in and wanted to buy you out, and of course, look, everybody has a price, right? But at the same time that
Oh,
they,
me too, but
yeah,
mine's just stupid.
you know, but again, there's a whole lot that goes behind it where it's like, hey, they enjoy it's a look, most craft distillers are not going to become billionaires. It's an honest job. It's an honest pay. You enjoy. There's a passion to it. You employ local, people. Support local. So there's a whole community aspect behind it, which I think is great because it's like somebody said, if I sold out for $50 million or whatever the number was, but now the people that have worked here at my distillery are now unemployed, possibly. So it's one of those. There's a conscious thing to it, right? So which I think is great. So let me ask you. All right. So the logo here. I understand you do have a passion for the sea and sailing, or something to that effect, right?
True, true.
Yep.
I do.
Yep.
So yeah, it's a compass rose. It's because I've been sailing since I was 15 years old. I love it. Sailing is a big part of myself. However, if you notice, our compass rose is canted 7.5 degrees off of true north. That's because if you're standing here at my distillery, the magnetic declination is 7.5 degrees.
Oh, that's awesome.
So there, you got a little Easter egg. Why
There,
is it off?
there you go.
Um, you know, and by the way, yeah, support local, and I love to hear that, but I don't want to be the supported by local. I want to be a rum that people desire everywhere. I want to make a product that's so good that somewhere in England or Denmark or China or Australia, people want a bottle of just rum because it is that special. That's the type of rum that I want to make.
Cool.
I mean, the stuff I got there is 4 months old. It's good. Stuff I'm drinking tonight, it's 2 years old. It is a lot better. I mean, what you're drinking, that's my go to. But if I've had a single sip of my 2 year, I can't drink my regular stuff for a couple of days. Just doesn't taste right.
Well, I guess it's the perks of being the owner of a distiller of that company.
Indeed. Perks.
It's right. All right. So let's see. All right, so John, I know you listen to the podcast here, and so we're going to go into the segment here. So do you familiar with what's coming up next here?
A little bit.
Okay. So all right. So
Couple of shows.
there we go. So here they go.
There it is.
All right. So we're going to go into the segment here is what we call in 4 sips or less. We're going to put John on the rapid fire and the hot seat here and see how he does with some of these questions here. So, as you know, the first one, everyone who's a rum guest pretty much should know the first question that comes up here is, all right, so is it neat or on ice?
Depends on the rum.
Oh, okay. All right. That's fair.
No, serious.
That's fair. That's fair.
The Maplewood rested, neat
Okay.
every day. The oak on ice.
Okay. There you go. All right. So in 4 sips or less, and we talked about the um that you're in Oregon, and there was, a kid. Yeah, I think we're probably fairly close in age. I think we talked a little bit about offline about that. And so there was a movie that made Oregon fairly popular, right? Um, so are you a fan of the Goonies movie?
Hey, you guys!
So I take that as a yes. Is that a yes?
Indeed.
Okay. All right. So great. I love that that's how you answered the question because in four sips or less, number three, is Sloth chained up in your basement?
No, I would keep him upstairs.
Oh my God. Oh, we love Sloth. Yes. Rest in
Absolutely.
rest in peace,
I
Wyatt
just
Cenac.
quoted him for God's
Yeah,
sake.
I know, right? Yeah, that was a great movie coming. Supposedly they made a second Goonies movie, but still have never seen it actually.
I've never seen it.
Yeah, I don't know. I think it went right to Betamax. I think
Probably
so.
right to Betamax,
Yeah,
yeah. Don't date yourself.
yeah, right. Hey, you can see the gray in this beard here. All right, so in four sips or less, number four. What's your favorite thing about Sandy, Oregon,
Um,
other than the distillery?
Other than the distillery. You know, I like the small town feel, and the fact that it really splits the difference between Mount Hood and the Columbia River.
Hmm.
So I can go sailing in about the same amount of time it takes me to go snowboarding.
Oh
It's
wow.
just a matter of I hit the highway and go left or right. Am I going sailing today or am I going snowboarding? And those
Hmm.
are my two favorite hobbies.
Okay, that's very yeah. Because you're just outside of so about how far are you out of Portland?
20 minutes.
Oh wow. Okay, that's not bad.
Yeah, really close.
Yeah, that's the one thing about obviously living here in Florida. We do have we can go surfing, but we definitely we have to travel a lot farther for the snowboarding aspect of it. So definitely for sure. So
Yeah, it's a plane ride for you, I think. I mean, I guess maybe you could drive to Georgia. Do they have it
yeah,
in Georgia?
uh, yeah. There's something I don't know if to be honest. Every year we keep talking about trying to take the kids up to go see snow since they were born here in Florida. So they've definitely missed out on some of that. So, but yeah,
It does snow occasionally in Daytona.
I know. I so I so I've been here in Florida now for I don't know since '91, and I first moved to Daytona, and I know there was a big freeze that happened. I think in '89 uh,
Yes, there was.
that I got
I
a.
was riding a motorcycle from Zephyr Hills back to Hunter Army Airfield in Savannah,
Oh,
and I ran into snow.
oh.
It was not fun.
Now we had snow. There was some people showing newspaper articles about that time in West Palm. They actually got snow here in West Palm, so it definitely it can happen so much for global warming, I guess. But that's a whole nother podcast episode. So all right, so John, so I appreciate you playing our little fun. Again, as you said, we'd be a little bit having a good time here with our segment of in four sips or less or rapid fire. So, but I definitely want to welcome you now to the podcast alums here. So you are
Oh,
there you
sweet.
go. We'll send this out there to you. Get it out here soon there. So there's our alum shirt there back in our back beats meets
Good
spirits. So
deal. I'll trade
yeah.
you. I'll send you one of mine.
Okay,
I
yeah.
own the trademark on just a t-shirt.
That's
We make Just Rum.
that's perfect. Yeah,
I have just a trademark. Well, I have just a t-shirt, just a hoodie. I'll hook you up.
okay. You're just a guy. You're just a great guy.
Yeah. Yeah. Literally, the actual legal name of the distillery is Just a Distillery Incorporated.
Okay.
Our tasting room has a sign that says Just a Tasting Room. We make Just Rum. We have just a glass, just a
Oh my God.
coaster,
Yeah. Yeah.
just a hoodie.
Yeah, if you're gonna be in it, you got to be all in it, man. Right?
Absolutely. Long term.
So, all right. So as we wrap up here, John. So, what do you want? Here's the as we call it the shameless plug. What do you want people to check out? Where do they want to go? How do they find Just Rum and all of that? So here's your advertising commercial pitch, whatever.
Okay, well, we do tasting events around the country. We are doing the Rum Renaissance Festival this fall, November, and we're gonna try and get into the Seattle Rum Festival next month. And it really boils down to you can email me. I'll find you a way to get some rum to you. Um, we're currently open for sale in Oregon and Southern Washington, trying to get into Idaho and Montana. Uh, it's just really hard to pick up distributors. So, reach out to me directly, reach out to your local liquor store, tell them you want some Just Rum. I'm willing to ship it to any liquor store that I can legally send it to. If you live in Alaska or any one of the 13 states that allow direct shipping, I'll just send it to you. I send a bunch of rum to Alaska. Um, Up there, it's a different country altogether. Uh, some places in Alaska, you're allowed to ship 10 gallons of rum per year to any one individual who does not live in a dry city or county.
Oh, wow.
Um, so we have resorts and lodges up there that do order from us, which is pretty awesome. But try it. If you see us at one of these festivals, give it a try. We are definitely not a typical rum.
Yep. So no, and again, that's how I, found out about John and Just Rum. Again, learning from other folks here, Roger and Robert or Cole or whatever the hell they're going by these days, on Just Drinking channel. And again, I think they met you at a previous event, and it's one of those you kind of it's the getting the word out there and so forth. And it's and it's funny. We didn't even get to tell the story. Is I know we met up last year, which was I had a great time, and I know things they were breaking down that Sunday night, and it was like, all right, I don't want to carry these boxes of stuff home or ship it back, right? Say, hey, do you want these boxes of rum? I'm like, yeah, dude, twist my arm. Okay, I'm gonna go. I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get my truck. So, and I have given them away to people, John. So, I mean, a lot of
Good.
folks here in Florida
And the
that
feedback's been
yeah,
good.
yeah. Mike, Mike, one of our Facebook, we do our live Facebook show on Thursday nights. I do a little bit of what I call the biggest happy hour and a half an hour, and Cole and Rogers talk about it. Is Mike tunes in, and he lives up in Orlando, and he's part of the Florida Rum Society. And I said, hey, I said, here, I said, you want to try something? I said, try this rum, and I think I gave him the maple rested. And he's like, man, that is just. And he used to be a bourbon guy too, who's now
Uh-huh.
become a big rum guy, and he's like, this is
Nice.
great. So yeah, so I'll have to remind him, let him know about the Renaissance Festival at the end of the back, in November, and hopefully come on down and meet you and so forth. So yeah, he enjoys it, and it's definitely different, right? It's got a different, as we talked about, the wood and the process.
Yep.
So definitely for sure. So well, very
Well,
oh
good
well,
deal.
yeah. Well, before I forgot to ask about the coins. So
Oh,
what's with the coins, right?
so I have a lot of different coins. Those are challenge coins that they're inspired by my time in the military. Each of them tells a story. This year's coin has a picture of the still that started it all on the back. I have the shelf coins, which are on my less expensive products. When people bring those coins to my distillery, I give them $3 off of other swag so they can trade them in for t-shirts or hoodies. They've got 10 coins, they got $30 in credit for other swag
Cool.
or coasters or what have you. And then I will take the coins they trade in and hang them on bottles again to send them back out to the liquor store. Right now, I've got 5 coins in the wild. That's not a big deal. But in a decade, when I have a bunch of coins out there, you'll get people that start going on treasure hunts looking for coins they don't have, and people will still keep trading them in. And literally, it says on the coin, it's just a coin, but it was inspired by my time in the military and the challenge coins that you could pick up from different units that you served with or what have you that were oftentimes traded from other soldiers. So
Well, very cool. So
yeah, it's just you know,
no, it's cool.
a little token of appreciation.
Yeah. So what branch? And thank you for your service.
Oh, I was in the army. It was 100 million years ago.
I yeah,
Seems like it
yeah, I
sometimes.
wasn't gonna say it was like last month or anything. No, but no, that's awesome because the third guest for this, as you know, right? You already know this is National Rum Month is August. So this
Yep.
is this is the third podcast that we have for National Rum Month, and
Well, you know
what
what? Let me
you
show you before you go. I'll
yeah
show you one of the bottles that is one of my premium bottles. Hold
okay
on.
yeah.
So we talked about the maple 2 year. So this is the oak rested 2 years. And
Okay.
so you can see there's a little difference on the label,
Yep.
but we do a little bit of a different coin for that one too.
Oh, okay.
Um, right? It's a little heavier, a little different design, front and rear, and what have you. Funny story about this. When I bottled that, I saved back some for myself. And I recently went to a liquor store and bought a case because that which I had saved, I consumed. So I bought a case of my own rum back at retail, which is bullshit. I should have saved 2 cases back. But that should tell you something. If a distiller goes to a retail establishment to buy his product back because he ran out, you might want some of that.
Yeah. Hey, well, look, you supported local. See what you did there. There you go. Oh man. So now
It
that.
was funny. I only had 4 of the oak barrels um, when I started the distillery. The first barrel purchase I bought was 4 of the oak barrels and 2 smaller maple barrels. And I released 2 of the barrels because I was going to keep the other 2 oak barrels to see how the rum progressed at 4 and at 5 years. And they're 30-gallon barrels. So we ended up with 22 cases of rum. And Mike, who owns one of the liquor stores here, the Farmington Aloha liquor store, he's probably got the best rum collection ever. He got me a bottle of Black Tot 1970.
Wow.
The it was literally the last bottling, and he saved that for me because I was born in 1970. So I'm using that as, even though I've tried it from other people. It's not my absolute favorite rum, but the fact that it was made the same year I was,
Yeah.
that's my celebratory bottle. So when we open the tasting room to the public, I'm going to take a nip. When we buy the dirt to build our next campus on, I'm going to take a nip. And when we open that campus, I'm going to crush that bottle. Because right now it's 52 years old, right? So I go in there to pick that up and I grab a case of this, which Mike only started with 11 cases of it because when he first tried the ones we pulled off, he's like, I have to have that for my store. I'm like, Mike, I'm out. We did that for distillery only sale. And he goes, yeah, but I've been to your distillery. You have 2 more barrels. I said, I know, but I'm holding them. He said, so do a barrel release for my store. I'm like, what are you going to do for me? I mean, how does that benefit me? I could save that for, 4 years. He said, if you give me a single barrel of that, I will carry all of your rums for the next 2 years. Okay. So they're all lined up on a shelf. And when you go in there, normally it's the big brands that got a large section. Every brand, every type of rum I have is on his shelf. And he still sold me a case of my own hooch. Damn it. Let me show you that Black Tot, though.
You definitely need to talk to your accountant because I'm sure there's a way to kind of figure something out.
Look at
Oh
that.
man,
Is that not cool?
that's yeah. And I
It
know
even has a little plaque on the bottom.
and considering that right, so we're taping this August 2nd and July 31st was just a few days ago, which was the Black Tot Day, right? 50 years ago.
Yes, it was.
Yep. So very yeah. That's
So,
that's the stuff you put away when you're having a party at the house, right? You keep that up.
yeah, go on Whiskey Exchange and see how much that bottle sells for, and that'll tell you just how stupid I am.
All right, let's see here. We're Googling here. All right, so search.
That's 1970 Black Tot.
But I'm looking at a couple different that show up here in Google. So I know
Yeah, Black Tot Royal Navy Rum.
So looking at it about around $1,000.
Close, yeah. I have the first official, or what I have, the first unofficial issue was 1655. The first official issue was 1731, and the last day of issue was the 31st of July, 1970.
Wow.
And I have a bottle of 1970.
Black Tot, last consignment, 889, and then I see something else. That's a little bit different. Okay, yeah. So,
Yeah.
whew. Well, yeah. That's it. See, like behind me, John, is I is as you probably have seen, the different bar shelves, right? So I'm sure
Yep.
you keep your
Yep.
stuff locked up away from the the friends that come over and say, "Oh, let me try this," right? No, you got to appreciate
Oh,
it.
no, 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 no. I have a rule. If it's in my liquor cabinet and it's open, you're welcome to it.
Mm.
If it's closed, you're not. And so, because of that rule, this bottle doesn't sit in my liquor cabinet.
Smart guy.
You
That's
know,
right. Yep.
but and I'm not a snob. There are plenty of other rums out there that I like. I'm a huge fan of many of the Foursquare releases. Richard Seal does a great job with that distillery. He's been he was brought up in the rum business. I believe it was his grandfather that started a rum blending business in England. I could be mistaken about that, but I know he's got, family ties to the rum industry for years. He's a really big influencer in the ministry of rum, great guy, makes awesome rum. Uh, you know, Mount Gay, some awesome rum there. There's a lot of awesome rums coming out of Central America right now. I'm a huge fan of all of them. I'm not saying that mine is, better, worse, or anything like that. I will say that my 2 year has its own legs, and I would put it against pretty much any of them and say, hey, this stands up to what I consider to be a great rum, and I hope other people agree. And, there's plenty of room for many different manufacturers. I'm not going to bash anybody. There are craft distillers and there are large conglomerates that make spirits that I'm not a fan of, but other people clearly are, or they wouldn't be making it, right?
Right. Yep.
I've tried some stuff there was a period of my life where I thought Fireball was amazing. That's not today, but there was a period of my life where that was for me. So I believe there's plenty of room for everybody in this industry. Drink what you like.
Yep.
Like what you drink.
There
If
you
you
go.
don't like what you drink something else.
All
There's
right.
probably something else out there for you.
That's definitely a great way.
With
Yeah.
that, I think I've tied up a bunch of your evening, haven't I?
Yeah. I think we've hit all the marks here. So we've gone through. So I think as we wrap up here is to definitely, I appreciate John for coming on here. I know, like I said, we've have met and have shared, and I'm glad that John's part of the podcast series here for August with National Rum Month. And getting a chance for a lot of folks probably here in the East Coast, or exposed to it if you haven't seen them at the Miami Rum Renaissance, is definitely check it out. It's making some good products here, and
If you find yourself in the neighborhood, stop by.
yeah, if you're up in the Pacific
Fly to
Northwest,
Portland, we're close.
yeah, it's they're not just right up there. If you're going up to, sure, a lot of people go up there to Seattle for conferences, or Portland, etc. So definitely check out Just Rum, justrum.com, and follow them on all the social medias. Follow them. Again, you usually will sometimes find John over in the Just Drinking YouTube channel every Wednesday night. He pops in there with a couple other folks there, other alums, podcast alums like Doc, and
Doc Brown, good
yep,
people.
yep. And so yeah, definitely we'll have on. Maybe John will have you on for one of the happy hours, and on the
That'd be awesome.
yeah. So
let me get my new building open, and maybe we'll do a walkabout during the happy hour.
Yeah, that would be great for folks to kind of get a feel for, walk through, and have a happy hour and so forth. So check out the podcast there. This will be part of our August series. Check out, rate, review, subscribe, give us a rating. Leave me a review. That helps me, because then what do you like? What don't you like? Good or bad, right? And like John said, hey, he put his stuff out there, and people gave him feedback, in the Ministry of Rum. Same thing for me. Give me a review and leave it out there in Apple Podcast, and follow all of our socials, Instagram, Facebook, etc., and check out the website. And again, appreciate John, for coming on the podcast. And cheers. And we'll just have a great
Cheers.
night. Yeah. All right, John.
You can find me at justrum.com.
There you go. How
Best
simple?
rum website ever.
How simple is that? So, all right, all. Have a great night. Talk to y'all.
Have a good night, Paul.